Y'all enjoying this? Good stuff? Are you getting some stuff that will be life-changing for you? You're starting to see it completely different, right? How many of you have heard all these scriptures before? Let's see hands. How many of you have heard them with this kind of backing? Nobody's heard them with this kind of application. Are we starting to see light bulbs come on? You know, one of the most exciting things for me is watching the light bulbs come on. It's watching people connect the dots. It's watching people start to get excited again about what God will do with this. Now, Leroy alluded to some things about how God just kind of drops stuff in your lap. He doesn't always give you mailbox money, but He does give you the inspiration. That was a conversation I had with one of you at the break earlier. You know, it says in Psalms that God gives you the desires of your heart. How many of you have heard that before? And how many of you said, okay, God, this is what I want. You're supposed to give it to me, so where's it at? You know, I think we've misinterpreted that scripture. God gives you the desire. Let me say that again. He gives you the desire. He causes you to want. He will provide all your needs, but if there's something you want, you better be willing to do a little extra work for it. It's called diligence. It's called perseverance. It's called chasing your dream. Amen. Who has a dream? Let me see your hands. Who's got a dream? You know what's really sad is when we're younger, we dream. We play games. We imagine. And then something happens when we grow up. And somebody says, you can't do that anymore. You're an adult now. You have to be responsible. You've got bills to pay. So dreaming gets put on the back. And we start selling ourselves for the dollar so we can pay those bills. But if we turn and we focus back on the dream, all of a sudden we're giving God an opportunity to provide. We've got it all backwards, don't we? We've got it all backwards. I love how Leroy talks about his phone just rings. Leroy, can you do another Walmart? No, not interested. He winds up doing it anyway. And he's probably getting paid a little bit more than he would have if he'd have just agreed to it in the first place. Years ago, I'm in a Best Buy. And I'm not in the best mood. And I know a lot of you don't know me, but a couple of you do. And you can hear their laughter right now. And I'm not in a real good mood. I've got to buy a cell phone. It's almost as painful as buying a car. You know, you got all these, pick this one, you get this rebate, all this. I'm about ready to go on a tangent about mail-in rebates, and maybe I just won't do that. We'll save that for tomorrow. So I've been back and forth. I went to the actual cell phone company store, and then I'm back to Best Buy, and I'm looking for the best deal because that's how I am. That's how I am. I hate mail-in rebates. And when a company says, oh, you can buy this phone and you'll get a $100 mail-in rebate. But the part they don't tell you is you have to give them the $100 up front and then wait 8 weeks for them to give it back to you. Now, if they can get 100 people to give $100 today, if 100 people loan them $100 for 8 weeks and they can deposit it in a bank account and earn 2%, how much money are they making on your money? So I'm understanding this, and I'm like, you want my money for what? And I'm in a bad mood. Don't know why. Just not happy. And in the middle of my attitude issue, God shows up in the most unlikely way. Because while I'm standing there arguing with the poor guy at the Best Buy counter about why I have to pay this for that phone and why can't I have that phone because there's no fee attached to that, and this guy over here is part of my conversation and goes, I want to talk to you. He knew what I did for a living, and he had been involved in developing a software project that went flat and did nothing. And I listened to him begrudgingly, and I went home and I says, can you believe the people that just come and introduce things to me like I'm supposed to be their savior? And I've got a really nasty attitude about it. But I humbled myself and I listened anyway. And we met. And this guy introduced me to some other people and then disappeared. I've never heard from him again. That little piece of software that we had developed just generated $10,000 in income for my company last month. It's been doing that since about December of last year. God will just drop things in your lap when you least expect it if you just listen. Amen. If you just listen. And some of you are out there thinking, well, I've got this idea and it'll never happen. I'm too busy. I got to pay my bills. But if you submit it to God, what do you think He'll do to open up a door for you? What are the possibilities that He can use that idea to increase your income and make you an effective use in the kingdom? It all starts with a dream. With Abram, it all started with a dream. Now, I love that story because how crazy is this dude? He lives in a land full of people that don't even believe in God. He's the only one. They all serve some other God. And so he starts talking about, I was talking to my God, and they're like, you're doing what? Your God talks to you? How many people have heard somebody say that to you? I've got a good friend. He's a financial planner, lives around the corner from me, believer, knows the Word. And I mentioned one day that I was talking to God, and he just stopped and goes, you talk to God? And I suddenly felt like Abram probably felt. Now, Abram didn't just say, I talked to God. He actually says, God told me I need to leave. Now, think about this. First of all, he's talking to God that nobody else believes in. And all of a sudden, he's told he's got to leave this land and go somewhere. Where are you going, Abram? I don't know, out there. God will show me. How sane is he? But what did he do? He picked up and went. And he trudged out there in the land. And you know, when he went, the Bible says there was a famine in the land. I love famines. You want to have a lot of fun? Look up the word famine. And go look at every famine and how God shows off. Because here at Abram, this crazy dude heard of God that nobody else believes in and decides to head for a land that he doesn't even know exists. And he's going to be a father of many nations. When he himself is without hope and without a future because his wife is barren. And he has the audacity to believe a dream that God spoke into his heart. How many of you have a dream and you're not even wanting to believe in it because you think it's too big? There's a quote I read that I absolutely love. It says, dreams were made a size too big so we could grow into them. If the dream is big, then you need a big God to get it. Now, personally, I've got a personal battle cry. And that says, let's go create a problem that only God can solve. Because if I make little bitty problems that I can fix, then I can take all the glory for it. But if I go create a problem that only God can solve, who's going to get the glory? Now, there's a little bit of wisdom in that, and that comes with just being a good steward with what He's given you. We all have to start somewhere. We start by taking control over our finances. We have to take this control over our finances because if we don't, we will never be able to reach the dream that He's placed in our heart. But you've got to have a purpose to go after that dream. You see, God provides for the vision that He gives you. That's why it's called provision. He gives you something for your vision. The word pro means for. Too often we're sitting there going, God, I'll do this dream, no problem, but it's going to cost me $1 million. So as soon as you put that $1 million in my hand, I'll go build it. And God's like, wait a minute. That's not how this works. Say, I gave you the desire. I gave you the dream. I gave you the vision. When you start moving in that direction, I'll make sure that everything's there for you. When Abram started moving, he believed, and his confession was, I'm going to be a father of many nations. But in his circumstances, his wife is barren. Was he waiting until she was pregnant before he went? No, he had a vision and he started chasing it. He says, I know that God is going to bless me. He's going to prosper me. He's going to make me wealthy and influence me. So he takes off from the land, pursuing a vision. Provision did not come for a full chapter later. So he leaves in chapter 12. In the middle of chapter 13 is when God says that he was made very wealthy in livestock, silver, and gold. Now we think about that for just a second. It was an agriculture that was driven, or it was an economy that was driven by agriculture. So they grew crops. It's pretty easy. I'm going to put a bunch of corn in the ground. I'm going to water it, and it's going to grow. That's increase. If I grow a lot of corn, I'm wealthy. I'm corn rich. I got sheep. I got male sheep and I got female sheep. All I have to do is lock them up and let them do their thing, and pretty soon I'm going to have more sheep, and I'm going to be very wealthy in sheep. But like Leroy said, how do you explain the silver and the gold? God was making provision for his vision. If he did not step out in faith chasing his dream, he wouldn't have it. Now, in the process, he's got to be faithful with what God has given to him. First thing he gave him was what? The dream. The first thing he gave him was the vision. Now, I did a study on faith, and you'll find this interesting. This is a whole other story, so we're just going to skip a stone across it real quick. The word faith in the Greek is the word pistis. I know that doesn't sound like the best word, and it's what some people feel on I-4 in rush hour. But it actually is a Greek word. It has 3 different meanings. The first meaning is a simple belief. And sometimes we have to work up that belief. I believe it, I believe it, I believe it. Y'all seen Miracle on 34th Street? The little girl in the back of the car in the closing scene? I believe, so he is real. I believe, I believe. We ever feel like that with our faith in God sometimes? I believe, I believe, I believe. Sometimes you have to work it up. It's a decision that we're making to believe. But that's only the very most basic level of faith. The second level of faith is conviction. That's the place where you begin to believe on it so strongly that you must act upon it. Abram moved from a point of conviction. He believed so strongly that his God was going to bless and prosper him and make him the father of many nations, that the conviction of his heart drove him from his land where he was undoubtedly very comfortable. But he was not fulfilled, so the pain of his lack of fulfillment became greater than his circumstances, and he decided to follow the conviction of his heart and move. The third level of faith is fidelity. Anybody remember when they used to call TV or stereo hi-fi, high fidelity? Now we've progressed beyond that, HD, high definition. That's the new word. It still refers to fidelity. Fidelity refers to a reproduction of the original signal that is as close to the original signal as possible. I used to have a big satellite dish in my yard. The kind that when I wanted to change a channel, the whole dish would rotate to catch the satellite. And we had a guide that let us know when our shows were being fed to the networks, so we could move the satellite and get that feed and watch the show without commercials. That was obviously before DVR. And then when that show we were able to watch on a Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock, after church of course, because we were good Christians. So we'd watch the live show at 2 o'clock on a Sunday, and then when it broadcast on Wednesday night with all its commercials, it looked like exactly the same signal we watched on Sunday, with the exception of the commercials that were inserted. That was a high fidelity signal. The original image would broadcast from a station and distributed through multiple other stations, and it looked exactly the same. You watch a live event, and you can see it's playing out here as clear as it is on your TV screen. That is a high fidelity signal. It's a replication of the original signal. Our faith moves from belief to conviction to where pretty soon we become walking images of Jesus. And he will come back in his people long before he comes back for his people. But he's coming back for a people who will be faithful with what he's given us. And the first thing he gives us is a vision. As we chase this vision, we must have resources in order to acquire the vision. Resources equal time. That's your most valuable resource. You will never get it back. Anything you invest your time in had better return dividends. Resources equal your talent. What are you good at? More importantly, what are you passionate about? Because you might be really bad at something, but if you're passionate about it, you will do it until you become good. There was a time when you were lousy at walking. And you would bump into things, and your parents would laugh and giggle because it was cute. Now you're really good at it, right? You don't bump into things anymore, right? At least not admit it. You know, occasionally I'll be walking down the road and there's a street pole and I forget to look up because my face is in my phone. But I've gotten a lot better at walking, and you can say the same. And then you go from walking to running, all with practice. What are you passionate about? Follow your passion and the money will follow you. I had a client who came to me years ago looking for some investment advice. And she hired me to consult. We were doing some phone consulting. And we had so many hours of time, and we blocked out, and we were touching base every so many weeks. And after about 4 sessions, she tells me, Troy, I just can't get excited about this. I says, well, what can you get excited about? She says, I really want to go minister to women at the battered women's shelter. I said, do it. Her words to me were, but there's no money in it. Who was the bigger influence in her life at that point? Money. The spirit of mammon was saying, go, get the money. And I encouraged her, follow your passion. So we kept talking. And she went through a process. She took a class. She got certified to go become a counselor at this shelter. And then she started ministering to the women of the shelter. And then one day she's telling me, she goes, you're not going to believe this. I said, well, come on, tell me. She went down there on a Thursday night. She had come home, felt like I just don't want to be here. It's the Lord tugging on her heart. So she went down to the shelter and started making dinner. It was a time of intimacy for her to really be able to minister to these women. Not go down there in the Christian sense of, I'm going to get you saved, but to genuinely minister to them. And in doing so, one of the ladies opens up and says, you know, I just don't feel beautiful. I'm not worth anything. I'm not pretty. I'm not attractive. And this broke her heart so much, she said, nonsense. Yes, you are. We're going to do a makeover day. And she went in the following Saturday. She had sold Mary Kay cosmetics. Not very successfully, I should add. And she walked in with her makeup bag of all her leftover samples that had pretty much bankrupted her trying to buy to keep her business afloat. Anybody ever done any network marketing? You know what I'm talking about. And she starts using the makeup to beautify these women and pamper them and make them feel good. You know what they did? They started buying product. And without her even intending, she made profit. Why? Because she pursued the passion of her heart, and God opened up an opportunity for her to use that to bring increase back into her life. You got to be faithful with the vision. Then you got to be faithful with the money. You got to take control. Because as you already know, if you don't control your money, then your money will control you. How many of you have felt controlled by your money lately? That's not a fun place to be, is it? It's not a fun place at all. One of the greatest fields of warfare is in finances. I look at spiritual warfare in this way. My job is to command my soldiers, I call them dead presidents. They're supposed to set up into rank and file platoons, and they're supposed to go into certain fields and fight certain battles and take territory and bring it back. That is spiritual warfare. Bringing in money, for the purpose of growing visions, of growing businesses, businesses that provide jobs for people who need the income to sustain their lives. Income that can be invested back into the kingdom. That is spiritual warfare. That's where you start to take control of your money and you command it. I think I told you earlier, I don't believe in an envelope system. I don't like budgets. I think we have to have some guidelines. But a budget in itself becomes another form of control. And you don't want your money in control. Your job is to take dominion over it. So start looking your money. You need to consider your ways. What are you doing with it right now? This was a life-changing passage that God showed me several years ago. Consider your ways. It says in Haggai, you looked for much, but it came to little. And when you brought it home, I blew it away. That's the Lord speaking. I blew it away. Why? Because of my house that is in ruins. Oh, but Lord, if you bless me, I'll give more. I'll give when you bless me. And now he's saying, consider your ways. Jesus said you have to be faithful with little before you'll be given much. Haggai says, God is destroying it because you're not being faithful with it. You've got to line up your dollars like little soldiers and start to command them and tell them exactly what you're supposed to do. There's a ladder of accountability that we all live in our lives. We like to start down here at the bottom level where we blame others. Let's be real, we've all been there. It's not my fault. The boss decided to pass me over for that promotion. I was really counting on that raise. Now I can't get the extra money that I was really counting on from that promotion, so I'm not able to pay this bill. That's usually code for, I was expecting a raise, so I've already spent the money, and now I can't afford to make the payment. I've got tenants that pay rent. Awesome form of passive income, by the way. And you would not believe some of the stories. I had one that called, you're going to love this. My rent's going to be late this month, okay? Why? My estranged husband, who was, what's the word when they're chased out of the country because their citizenship isn't right? Deported back to one of those Caribbean islands, West Indies, something like that. And he was in a car accident and the medical expenses are too much, so I had to wire $2,000 for his doctor care to keep him alive. Okay, sounds like a good one. All right, I'm going to have to charge you a late fee. Okay, no problem, I'll pay the late fee. The next month, I'm going to be a little bit late on the rent. My ex-husband died. That was my son's father. We've got to do some things to help the family with the funeral. The third month, I'm going to be late on the rent. Why? Because I'm going to visit my ex-husband. The same one who died. Oh yeah, it was the funniest thing. He didn't really die. Somebody just called me to tell me he died. Yeah, it didn't make sense to me either. Somebody who doesn't have control. They're not being faithful with what they've got. To he who has, more will be given. To he who has not, even what he has will be taken away. Excuses are the number one reason for failure. Every time you make an excuse, you're basically saying, I'm just not going to do it. I'm not taking responsibility for it. I'm incapable of moving that way. I can't do it. Can't, which means won't or don't know how. We can fix both of those. One's rebellion, one's just ignorance. We can teach you. It's up to you. Once we decide to start taking the blame for others, we enter into the excuse realm that I was just talking about. Oh, I hate excuses. I don't even want to ask sometimes, but sometimes it's just fun. Okay, you say you can't. Why? And then the story comes. Y'all can imagine a few right now, right? What are some of the wild stories that you've heard? Really good excuses. We all laugh at the good ones. My dog ate my homework. That's code for, yeah, I didn't do it. I was watching TV last night. An excuse. An excuse is nothing more than something that justifies your lack of personal action. Amen. Then we enter in a phase where we just want to wait and hope. I'm just waiting on God. He's shown me that I'm supposed to do this great and big thing, and I'm just waiting on Him to make it happen. I'm just waiting on God. Doesn't the Bible say in James that we can hasten the coming of the day?
Mm-hmm. It does.
Peter, thank you. So if we can hasten that, then why are we sitting back waiting? Without faith, it is impossible to please Him. Do you hear that? Yes. Does faith sit and wait? No, faith starts as that seed of conviction which causes you to get up and go because you believe so strongly in what was promised you that you won't wait for it, you will go attain it. So we stop waiting and we start stepping into owning it. This is what Leroy was just talking about. Own it. Own your identity. Who are you? You are children of the Most High God. God showed me this picture several years ago. He said, if I am a son of God, that makes me a prince of the king. If we live in a kingdom, and as a prince, you're able to walk around the castle and around the capital city, does everybody know who you are? Yes or yes?
Yes, they do.
So does that mean if you walk down to the marketplace, people recognize you? They're kind of parting the streets because they recognize the authority that you've got, right? Well, now, what if there's a city on the far reaches of this kingdom? One that does not see your face on a regular, everyday basis. And your father says, I want you to go to this city, and I want you to implement this new policy. So as a child of God, as the prince of the kingdom, we enter that city and nobody recognizes me. Is our authority any less? No. But because we're not recognized, what do? We cower. They don't know who I am. They won't listen to me. Dad, can you help? But if you know who you are and you start owning that identity, you can walk in, and now as the prince, you've got the king's signet on your finger, right? Because you're wearing a ring with that royal seal. And when you've got that royal seal, you can now command with all the authority of the kingdom, and you can accomplish the purpose that you were sent there to do. That's owning it. That's accepting your identity. And once we own it, we step into a place where we start finding solutions. One of the best questions we can ask whenever we hit a problem is, how can I fix this? It's not, oh no, I've hit this problem, I can't go any further. It's, there seems to be an obstacle in the road. How can we move it? If you're driving from here to Miami to go visit relatives, and along the way you have a flat tire on your car, are you going to coast off to the side of the road and go, flat tire? Aunt Mary, we can't come, flat tire. Or are you just going to change the tire and keep going? A lot of times life gives us a flat tire. It puts an obstacle in the way. And our job is to find a solution to overcome it. If it was easy, everybody would do it. But we can do all things. Why? Because of Christ in us. We can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. So we've got to climb that ladder. One is powerless. Where's the power? When we get to the top of the ladder, when we start accepting personal responsibility, when we start accepting our identity, when we start owning the identity that God put in us, when we start owning our responsibility to chase after our vision, then we can get after it. And when this thing goes too fast. When we start owning it, we can start looking at our finances in a different way. Now, I told you I don't believe in a budget, but you still have to have control. You still have to know what's coming in and what's going out. You still have to have certain guidelines, and you have to operate within a certain amount of reality. So tonight you get a couple pieces of homework. You ready for homework? Who here doesn't want to do homework? I thank you for the honesty. But homework is good, right? Y'all came here because you wanted to learn more about how to enjoy the kingdom increase in your personal finances, right? Because you want to be a bigger impact on the world around you, and you understand to do that, you've got to have control of your money. Well, to have control of your money, don't you think it's about time you knew exactly what your soldiers were doing? How many of you know exactly what all your soldiers are doing? So you've got to have control. So we can start that by doing two things. One, there was a handout that you got with your book this morning that has a little test to see where you're at with your personal finances. Take that test and just kind of see where you're at. Are you sailing smoothly, or are you a shipwreck? And then use that to start evaluating. Now, I can tell you one of the biggest problems that my wife and I had was cured with this simple test of sitting down and listing our bills and obligations. Well, I guess I can't say the biggest, because our biggest problem was when we had too much money. But we did have problems of not having enough money. And we're going through a particular phase in life where there just wasn't a lot of income coming in. And we had just enough to make ends meet. Just enough. And I'm going off the handle every time she would go buy a gallon of milk. What are you doing? And I went in to talk to God. And God says, well, why don't you go talk to her? I'm like, what? You want me to do what? He says, I want you to talk to her. Just list everything out and go talk to your wife. So I did. And in that 5-minute conversation, I just says, honey, I'm going to be real with you. This is our expenses. This is our income. They don't match, do they? She goes, no wonder you're always biting my head off. She now had an understanding I never had before, that she never had before. I denied her that because I didn't include her with my finances. That's so important. Remember, you're joined together in all things. Your traditional wedding vows say richer and poorer. This is for somebody because it's not in my notes. Start by listing your bills and obligations. Just know exactly where they're at. And if they're totally out of control, it's okay. Don't freak out. Don't stay up all night worrying about it. Because now you've got the start of taking control. You know where they're going. And when you know where they're going, you can begin to redirect and command your forces. So I'm going to give you a couple of guidelines that you can use. Our idea here is to live within 70% of your income. The chances are, if you're having struggles financially, your personal living expenses, your household expenses probably already exceed that 70%. That's okay. We've got to start somewhere. And the goal is to get those expenses within those 70%. When I'm talking about those expenses, I'm talking about your household bills, whatever you pay on a mortgage, a rent, if you've got that, groceries, gas, insurance, utilities, basic expenses that you need just to function your household. Ideally, that should fall within about 70% of your gross income. Then you want to take and be able to give 10%. I can't tell you how important this is. Giving is absolutely the most important thing. And I can say this because anytime I ask you to give, it never comes to me because I really don't need it. It doesn't bother me whether you give or not, honestly. I really don't care. It's for you that you give. Because you can't receive when you're like this, right? And we've all faced those times where we've tried to withhold that tithe and not give it. And then what happens when we start to do this? That's when God can put something in your hand. So it's vitally important that you give. Now, when I sat down with my wife and we went through this list, we had this great plan to pay off debt, and I'll talk more about that tomorrow. Our plan, of course, didn't work. But God had another plan. And He challenged us to start giving. So we actually doubled our giving, and He paid our debt off in 45 days. Something I wouldn't have been able to do in a year under my other plan, which I'll tell you about tomorrow. You've got to involve God in your plan. So as you sit down and you start listing your income and your expenses and they just don't work, you've got to involve God. Because all the silver and all the gold is whose? And if He knows that you're lining your heart with Him, what's to stop Him from putting it right in your face? And go, here it is. Of course, then you got to scramble and grab it real fast. But that's what He does. And then you start saving 10%. This is where most people miss it. The Bible was written during a time where we had an agroeconomic society. Farmers. Imagine a farmer. A farmer goes out in the field and plants a crop. A crop grows. Woohoo, I grew a big crop. I've got all these bushels of wheat. Now that farmer had to take a couple of those bushels and put it back in the silo so that they had seed to plant the next year. What happened if the farmer ate all the seed? Now they have nothing to plant. They're fat and happy this year, and they're starving to death next year. When you're not saving, you're eating the seed that God gave you to sow. So if you're not giving and you're not saving, you're starving the vision that God put in your heart. It's a little heavier than I thought it would be, but it's hitting, isn't it? The rest, if some of you math wizards added this up, you got 70%, 10, 10, that's only about 90%. What happens to the other 10%? This is where it gets fun. You got to start spending it on you. If you don't treat yourself nice once in a while, pretty soon you're not going to like yourself. Then you're going to start to think, well, I'm not worthy. I don't have any fun. Nobody likes me. And it's all because you're denying yourself a good time. So you take 10% of your income and you go treat yourself to something nice. Take yourself out to a nice dinner. Even if it is McDonald's, at least you don't have to cook and somebody else does the dishes. That's a nice treat. There was a time in my wife and I's life when a Friday night out was a drive-through at Wendy's. A couple of Happy Meals for the kids. We could spend $20. That was our night out. And that was awesome. But we had to have that. That was part of your sanity. You've got to have that. If you don't take yourself out and do something fun once in a while, you start to dislike yourself. But you don't spend that whole 10%. You spend about half of it to take yourself out. And the other half, you've got to invest in yourself. You've got to get a book. You've got to attend a seminar, take some classes, sharpen the axe. Make yourself more valuable in the marketplace, in whatever you're doing. If you go to work every day and you spend time studying what you do for a living and you get better at it, won't your boss reward you with promotions and raises, advances, transfers to places that you might want to be? But how do you get there if you don't take time and invest in yourself? You've got to. If you don't invest in yourself, then you will become very dull and boring and worthless in the marketplace. Paying yourself is one of the concepts that we really need to get a hold of. If you're not paying yourself, then you're eating the seed that you're given, and you won't have any seed to sow, and you won't be able to reap any increase. How many of you would like to be wealthy? Anybody not raise their hand? I saw a couple of you go, I do. Not quite ready to go, yeah, me. But I see every hand going up. How are you going to get wealthy if you never plant any seed? Isaac, in Genesis 26, was in a place during a time of famine. Oh, I love famines. And he's thinking, he's got this great plan. He says, I'm going to head off and I'm going to go down to Egypt. In other words, he's going to leave what God had planned for him and he's going to go do what the world says he should do. But before he went, he must have inquired of God because God spoke to him. Now, God's capable of making the rocks cry out. He's capable of making a donkey speak. But sometimes he just let us go do whatever it is we think we want to do. And if we don't ask him, he doesn't always volunteer a lot of information. I'm sure we've all experienced that, right? So I got a feeling that somewhere along the way, Isaac probably inquired of God. And God says, no, I think I want you to stay right here. And go ahead and plant a seed. And can you imagine this conversation? But God, there's a famine. Plant the seed. Okay, I'll plant the seed. And later on in that chapter, he reaps 100-fold. Now, too often we want to give, we want to get that 100-fold return, and we think that's the end of the story. But that story on Isaac, when he reaped that 100-fold return, the scripture says that he began to prosper, and he continued prospering after that. So that initial harvest was only the beginning. Happened during a time of famine, right? Obviously, he had some seed to plant. How are you going to get wealthy if you don't have any seed to plant? Now, I'm going to spend more time on this today than I am on giving. Because I got a feeling a lot of us, we at least believe in giving. But we don't believe very much in paying ourselves. Which means you have no seed to sow, which means you can't reap a harvest, which means you can't begin to prosper, which means you can't continue prospering. But somehow we're still just waiting on God. Now, when we first discovered this concept, I'm talking we, my wife and I remember writing in my journal, repenting for eating the seed and promising God that I was not going to do that again, that I was going to put some seed in my silo that He could direct me to plant in whatever field. So I opened a savings account. Now here's my mistake. Let me just be transparent with you. The savings account was at the same bank as my checking account. In fact, they were linked. And this really cool thing would happen at that point in time. Free overdraft protection. So I knew that if I was out and I swiped my debit card, I wrote a check, even if there wasn't money in the bank, I knew exactly what was in savings, and I knew the bank would just automatically transfer it over and go ahead and pay that. So I start putting money into savings, and then it comes right back out. And at the next paycheck, I see the same cycle again. Put money into savings. Yeah, honey, I put money in savings. And then we're out shopping. We decide to go to dinner at Emerald's, of course. And I swipe the card and pay the bill, knowing that what was in savings would roll right over and take care of it. How full was my silo getting? I was still eating the seed. So I decided to get a little smarter. We went across the street to another bank and opened up a savings account. We didn't get a debit card. We had the old-fashioned account that you had to actually go to the bank. That meant if we needed the money, it was available. But no longer was I able to just write a check or swipe the card and have it covered. Now I could physically put the money into an account every time I got paid, but it took work to go get it. What suddenly started happening to that account? It starts growing. And then this cool thing happens. It starts to multiply on itself. The first $100 was hard. The second 100 was easy. And before I know it, there's 1,000 in there. And before I know it, we've got almost 3 months worth of income saved up that we were then able to use to start a business that provided for 14 people to have jobs and generated $750,000 in its first year of existence. All because we had seed put in the silo. How many of you right now wish you had seed in the silo? Because you never know what kind of opportunity would be. I challenged a group of my employees once to do this. I said, take a $20 bill and just put it in your wallet. Don't spend it. And start asking God for an opportunity. Now, some of them went and spent it and tried to call it God that they had it because they were low on gas or some other excuse. And thank God that they listened to me to have that $20 so they wouldn't have had gas to get home that night. That's just poor planning. That's somewhere way down low on the ladder of responsibility, right? But one guy took that $20 bill and he encountered a friend who needed money and sold him a gaming system for, coincidentally, $20 that he turned around and sold the next day for $50. That's multiplication. That never would have happened if he didn't have a little bit of seed in his silo. How many times have you ever heard of somebody who got a really good deal on something and you're thinking, man, I never get deals like that? Anybody ever felt like that? I never get deals like that. Somebody comes and goes, man, look at this car. It's worth about $10,000 and somebody sold it to me for $1,500. You're going, man, I never get deals like that. I think the bigger truth is you probably don't have the $1,500 sitting in your silo to take advantage of it when it comes along. Because you need to learn to pay yourself first. You've got to have a little seed in the silo. If you don't have any seed in the silo, how are you possibly ever going to grow a crop? Everybody got it? Very, very important. Everyone who has will be given more. If you've got seed in your silo, now you've got a way to plant. You've got a way to grow. You've got a way to invite increase. Increase is a kingdom principle that does require some action that comes from you. Even the smallest little action. One of my daughters had a friend that she brought to one of our trainings. This 17-year-old young man whose father died tragically a few years earlier. He's growing up. He's got a younger brother who has Down syndrome, and he's suddenly having to be the man of the house. This 17-year-old young man who's thrust into the responsibility of an adult has every excuse for not being successful. And he grabs a hold of this principle. 3 months after that training, he comes to me and tells me how much money he's got saved in his account. 17 years old. Oh, and he raised all this money that he's saving by doing odd jobs around the neighborhood, not by working a regular job. But he grabbed a hold of the principle of paying himself first and started to sow seed in a silo. How many 17-year-olds are going around with money in their bank account right now? Very simple. Can we see how simple this concept is? And some of you are sitting back right now going, oh man. And you're kind of being a little rough on yourself, aren't you? I can feel the heaviness. Some of you are going, all right, you're spending too much time. And others are going, man, don't say that again. It hurts. But this is a vitally important concept. God wants to give you increase. Your responsibility is to plant seed. But you have to have seed to plant. If you eat the seed that He gives you, then you are not a faithful steward, and what you have will be taken away. There is a time coming in our economy that's not going to be pretty, unless, of course, you're on the right side of the equation. When we see an economic famine, we see a big transference of wealth. And when there's a transference of wealth, who do you think gets to buy all the assets? The people who have a silo full of seed. Right? So we broke this down and look at how to do it. One thing I wanted to hit, I think this slide skipped real quick. Where's it at? It's in there somewhere. My clicker is not cooperating today. Simple little truth that says the meek shall inherit the earth. What does meekness mean? Meekness means we live using less than our full potential. Jesus was the perfect picture of meekness. Am I right? Here's a man who walked the earth with all the power and authority of God. Could He call down fire from heaven at a moment's notice? Did He? When the soldiers charged at Him and Peter comes at him with a sword and whacks a guy's ear off, was Peter right in defending his Lord? You could say, by worldly standards, yes, he was. Jesus, with all of His authority and compassion, does what? Picks the ear up, puts it back on, and tells Peter, back down, dude. That's meekness displayed. How many of you are meek with your finances? Our world teaches us that if we get $1, we've got to spend $1. I'm sorry, our world teaches that if we get $1, we've got to spend $1.10. What if we got $1 and we only spent 90 cents? Better yet, what if we got $1 and we only spent 70 cents? And we gave 10 cents to God. We paid ourselves with 10. And then we invested the rest of it in ourselves to make us more valuable in our vocation. How much would that change your lifestyle? Very simple application. The meek will inherit the earth. I got a call one day from one of the crew foremen that I had. We used to do home remodeling and renovation. I'm not a contractor. I literally got this opportunity to start this company renovating homes. My background had been in real estate. The market was shifting, and I had an opportunity to go renovate homes. I didn't even own a pickup truck. I'm like Leroy. I didn't have a red Kia. I did have a Suburban. So I was kind of close. So I had this opportunity to start this company, and I met with a guy, and he says, can you do this? I said, sure. He says, how many houses can you handle? I says, 5. He said, okay, here. And I went, uh-oh. Now what? Well, I decided that my best pool of labor was going to be homeless people. Now think about this. I'm going to start a job that I know nothing about. And I'm going to hire the most unskilled, unprofessional group of people that I can possibly find. Was I creating the kind of problem that only God could solve? That might not have exactly been the greatest amount of wisdom. But it worked. And we actually saw people. One guy was sleeping on the streets under a bridge the day before I hired him. Today, still driving around in his car, works at Disney. He's making, I don't know, $15 an hour, very happy. I asked him what he wanted before I hired him. He said he wanted to live a good life. He was tired of being on the streets, tired of being beat down. He was coming to church with us. Oh, I never invited him to church. I just walked in and started living a life, ministering to him, being available to pray with him. And then one day he came up and he goes, I need to live a different life. Where do you go to church? I want to come visit. That's the power of ministry and business. Well, one of my crew foremen came to me and he saw this deal on a computer that he really wanted to get. He knew somebody that had this big Mac Daddy Mac Pro computer. I'm not into Macs, but I understood it was a pretty powerful computer and he really wanted it. And he calls me up one day and he goes, can I build you a website? Can I do something? I need $600. Now I'm going, opportunity. I didn't just want a website. I wanted a few other things. So we got a few other things. He got his computer. I got way more than $600 worth of value for my investment in his computer. And as I went with him to pick up the computer and handed him the money, I used the phrase, I said, the meek will inherit the earth. He started laughing and started a savings account. That transformed his life. He actually wound up owning a business himself about a year after that. It's remarkable what happens when you just start to command your money to go and do different things. But if you just start to throw it at things, get $1, spend $1, get $1, spend $1. Take myself out to dinner because I worked hard and I deserved it. I got a little extra money this weekend, so I'm going to go and take a vacation at the beach. And I'm not going to stay at the Motel 6, I'm going to stay at the Hilton. And when it's all over, you got a great memory with a few pictures, but you got no seed left in the silo. But God's going to bless me with increase. See the flaw in this logic? Do you see how this one simple little thing will completely transform your finances? So we look at this application from today. And where have we come today? We started off looking at our money completely differently, right? How many of you now can say that money is a different thing in your eyes? Yes. It's no longer the object of our desire. It's no longer something that we get up and pursue on a daily basis. It becomes an object that can be used just like a screwdriver, that when applied to the proper screw, does its job. But what happens if you grab a Phillips head screwdriver and try to put it into one of those with the crisscrossy head on it? It doesn't go real good. And if you try to force it, that thing can slip and poke you in the finger and you start bleeding. That's the voice of experience, who was too lazy to go get his own screwdriver. I'll make it work. That's the wrong tool for the job. But when we apply money properly, suddenly everything starts to work. So we start looking at our money differently. Then we started tearing apart the poverty spirit. How many of you enjoyed Keith this morning? Yeah. Wasn't that phenomenal? Really opens your eyes to some of the lies that we've been told, right? Doesn't it feel good to start to shake that off? You know what's freeing in that? Wow, I was lied to. I believed a lie. Now I know the truth and I never need to listen to that again. Isn't that freeing? Isn't that complete deliverance? I don't have to do without because my Father in heaven has all the silver and all the gold. I'm a child of the Most High God. And He provides for all my needs according to His riches and glory. And then to reinforce that, we destroyed the lies and the power of the spirit of mammon. How many of you enjoyed that? Now, whether you got debt or not, do you see the influence that thing has had in your life? I had a couple of you come up to me and go, I don't have credit card debt, but boy, was I still influenced that way. Paycheck to paycheck is still something mammon wants you to do that keeps you in bondage to your money. It puts you in slavery, modern day slavery, and God's saying it's time to get free. And He's about to loose some financial plagues on the earth. Good times. Then Leroy came up and started talking about your financial identity. Now you start to see and believe yourself differently. You know you're going to be challenged on that when you leave here, right? You know you're going to be challenged. You know the enemy's going to start whispering in your ear and go, no, you remember what happened to you last week? You remember where you were 2 years ago? Do you remember where you came from? Are you going to believe that? Or are you going to start claiming what God said about you? That's it, right? That's it. He gives you the power to create wealth. And the seed of that power is what? It's your vision. It's your dream. It's the desire that God put in your heart. Who has a dream? All right, here's another piece of homework. This is fun. You're going to start writing that dream. There's something that happens when you take a thought and you put a pen in your hand and you commit that thought to a piece of paper. You take it out of the intangible world of imagination and you just made it reality with the ink on the tangible piece of paper. Now you've taken a thought and you've put it into a form that you can actually touch. That's the first step in building your dream. When an architect builds a building, he gets a vision of that building and then he commits it to drawing. And then that drawing is then taken to the contractor who makes the walls stand up. That vision starts as something that's up here and it's intangible. And the first act of making it tangible commits it to a drawing. So you're going to go and you are going to start writing out your dream. And then you get to pray over that dream. You get to start trusting God for that dream. You're going to start at that level of faith we call belief. Believing, God, you gave me this vision for a reason. And you're going to keep praying over it. And God's going to allow you to tweak and twist that dream until it lines up with what He sees. And then it's going to become a conviction that starts to drive you out until that dream becomes a reality. And when it's a reality, when it actually erects, now you're walking in the fidelity of that dream. That's the process. It starts when you take control of your money. How many of you are going to go and start to look at your dollar bills just a little bit differently? And you're going to start to command them. And you're going to start to order them. Has this been a good day? Yes. Now, like Leroy said, we didn't come here to sell anything. We came here to equip you. We came here because we know that God is doing something. He's doing something in the economy, and He's got a plan to prosper His people. The wealth cannot transfer to the righteous unless the righteous are in a place to receive it. This is the beginning of that equipping. Tomorrow we're going to keep building on this. Tomorrow we're going to start off by understanding God's grace. Because we cannot accomplish anything that He puts in our hearts without His grace, without His empowering mercy. Then we're going to start taking a look at how we can plug up some of the leaks in our own bucket. How many of you know you got a leaky bucket? We already read today, you work hard, you bring in much, and it becomes nothing because God blows it away. That's about a leak in the bucket, right? So we're going to plug up those leaks, and we're going to start taking a look at some things that we can do. I've done some of these things with people sitting down one-on-one and found hundreds of dollars a month in their budget that they didn't even know existed. plugging up some of these leaks. Good stuff. Then we're going to start talking about becoming a multiplier. Who wants to be a multiplier? Yes. Jesus is looking for multipliers. If you read the parable of the talents and the minas, he gives authority to those who multiplied. And what did they multiply? Their money. He's looking for multipliers, people that he wants to give authority to in this land. Wealth building strategies is going to be a really cool roundtable session. We've told you there's going to be a time for questions. We're going to get all three of us here and we're going to get ready to answer some questions. We're going to introduce you to some strategies and we're going to give you a chance to open it up and start picking our brains. That's going to be fun, right? So you start working up some good questions because we're ready. Then we're going to talk about preparing the next generation. This is a very personal, dear, favorite part for me. The Bible says we're supposed to leave an inheritance for our children's children. We want to leave them tons of money. But what's the greatest thing we can give them? Power to live in what we have not yet lived. If we can give our kids something that we're not getting until now, what kind of an inheritance did we just hand them? We didn't just give them a fish, we taught them, right? And then we're going to connect all the dots. As we close this out tomorrow, we're going out with a bang. Because as you're seeing things right now and light bulbs are starting to come on and dots are starting to connect and you're going, wow, I can do this a little bit differently. I've never seen it this way. Suddenly it starts to look simple. But wait till you see how all this ties into what God plans for His kingdom economy in action and how He's going to use this economy to save lives all around the globe. It's going to be exciting. It is going to be exciting. Now tonight we do have a bonus session. 7 o'clock. I would love it if you all come back. We're going to have a dinner break, and then we're going to come in. We're going to have a little bit of time of worship, and Leroy's going to talk about crossing over. What are we crossing over? Crossing over into a promised land. You know, the Bible says that that promise of rest still exists. Who's that promise there for?
Us.
It's there for us, but we've got to cross over. And we've got to cross over into a land. I love it in Deuteronomy 11. It says that in this land, God brings the rain that brings the increase. When we're in Egypt, we've got to go out and dig the trench. Then we've got to dig the water trough. Then we've got to let the water in. We've got to control it. We've got to do all this work all season long. In God's economy, we're able to plant the seed. He brings the rain that brings the increase, and we reap the harvest. Which one would you rather live in? That's part of crossing over, understanding the promise, and you're going to hear more about that tonight. So we're going to start back here at 7 o'clock. Plenty of places to get dinner. I hope you all can come back and join us. If I don't see you tonight, I look forward to seeing you all at 9 o'clock. We start at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Please be here at 8:30 so we can start on time because we've got a lot to cover tomorrow.